To the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. Okay, how true is that, right? That's a classic joke from the legendary Jerry Seinfeld. And honestly, it hits the nail right on the head. It perfectly captures this kind of absurd truth about human nature, because time and time again, public speaking ranks right at the very top of our biggest fears, literally right up there with heights, snakes, and, well, death itself. So welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to crack this wide open and unpack exactly why our brains react this way.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Why do we fear public speaking so much? It's honestly one of the most fascinating puzzles of human behavior. I mean, think about it for a second. When you stand up to give a presentation, your physical safety is in absolutely zero danger. A microphone is not going to attack you, right? There's no actual physical threat in the room. So why is your heart pounding out of your chest? Why are your palms completely sweaty? Well, to figure out this mystery, we've got to turn to the science of psychology.
Now, psychology tells us that there really isn't just one magic answer to why we do the things we do. Instead, we have these 7 distinct psychological lenses. And by looking through these 7 totally different modern perspectives, we can fundamentally change how we understand ourselves. And of course, how we understand our paralyzing, knee-shaking fear of the stage.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the overarching puzzle of human behavior, and then we'll dive into unconscious drives versus conscious thoughts. Next up, we'll look outward at conditioning and social influence, followed closely by biology and evolutionary survival. After that, we'll explore free will and positive growth before bringing the whole shebang beautifully together with the biopsychosocial model.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the puzzle of human behavior.
So 7, that's the magic number here. Modern psychologists actually utilize 7 major approaches to figure out why we act the way we do. They rely on these 7 specific perspectives, whether they're trying to figure out, why some people absolutely love extreme sports, why others develop crippling phobias, or just why we feel basic sadness or anger. Let's see how each of these lenses answers our core question today.
Moving on to Section 2, unconscious drives and conscious thoughts.
We'll kick things off with the psychodynamic perspective, which, if you know your psychology history, traces all the way back to Sigmund Freud in the early 1900s. Now, this view focuses entirely on the unobservable mind. I want you to think of your mind like a giant iceberg. According to Freud, our behavior is guided by this massive, hidden, underwater section that we literally cannot see or control. Our unconscious mind is just packed full of primitive drives and traumatic childhood memories that we've pushed down or repressed deep into the abyss, simply because they're way too distressing to deal with on a normal Tuesday.
So what does this mean for our stage fright? Well, through this specific lens, our terror of the stage is actually just an unconscious dread of reliving some past trauma. A psychodynamic theorist would look at you and say, hey, you aren't actually afraid of the audience today. No, you are terrified because standing up there triggers this deeply repressed memory of being belittled or maybe rejected by an overbearing parent or a harsh teacher when you were just a little kid. Basically, it's an old, unresolved conflict bubbling right back up to the surface.
But you see, this brings up a massive divide in the psychology world. While the psychodynamic view absolutely insists we are driven by the unobservable unconscious and all our past traumas, the cognitive perspective steps up as a major counterargument. The cognitive view completely shifts the focus away from the past and shines a spotlight on our active, conscious, present-day thought processes. Honestly, you can summarize this entire viewpoint in just one word: thinking. Under the cognitive perspective, we are absolutely not just headless zombies walking around at the total mercy of our past. Not at all. Instead, we make decisions based on our active interpretation of a situation right now. So the really crucial takeaway here is that a cognitive psychologist would tell you that your fear of public speaking is caused completely by your own internal monologue. It's all those irrational, obsessive thoughts rapidly firing in your brain right before you speak. You know the ones. What if they see me sweating? What if I trip and fall? Oh my gosh, what if my zipper is open? Your own disastrous interpretation of the event is actually what's creating the panic.
Let's switch gears and head into Section 3, conditioning and social influence. Now we hit the behavioral perspective. Championed by early, highly influential researchers like John Watson and B.F. Skinner, this perspective completely rejected the idea of the unobservable mind. To make psychology a rigorous, true science, they believed we should only ever study observable behavior, nothing else. They essentially argued that we're like passive animals, simply responding to environmental stimuli. We're going to be way more likely to do things if we are rewarded or reinforced, and conversely, far less likely to do things if we receive a negative outcome or a punishment. So,
How on earth does a strict behaviorist explain our stage fright? Very, very simply, learning from experience. To them, fear is just a conditioned response. Think about it. Why do you never touch a hot stove twice? Because you learned from the pain, right? Well, a behaviorist would argue you fear public speaking because you've strongly associated it with negative past outcomes. Maybe you misspoke in middle school during a book report and the audience chuckled at you. That embarrassment? That was a punishment. Your fear today is simply your learned behavior screaming at you to avoid being punished like that ever again.
Okay, let's broaden our lens even further now and look at the socio-cultural perspective. Heavily influenced by the field of sociology, this perspective argues that our thoughts and our actions are profoundly shaped by the social categories we belong to, our cultural expectations, and all those unwritten societal rules. We do not exist in a vacuum, folks. Our environment and our culture deeply, deeply influence our mental processes.
This perspective proves that culture can literally manufacture anxiety out of thin air. Think about it. Every culture has these implicit societal rules, sometimes called folkways, about things like exactly how much eye contact to make, what hand gestures are appropriate, and how much raw emotion you're even allowed to display in public. Navigating that complex, invisible web of rules is incredibly stressful. Plus, if you happen to live in a highly individualistic culture like North America or Europe, as opposed to a collectivist culture in parts of Asia, there's an immense, culturally ingrained pressure to succeed completely on your own individual merits. That heavy cultural weight alone makes stepping up to the podium absolutely terrifying.
Moving right along to Section 4, Biology and Evolutionary Survival.
Here we have this super fascinating contrast between two very body-focused views. On the one hand, the biological perspective, which you might also hear called the neuroscience perspective, looks intently at present-day physiology. They see fear as a physical production. Your amygdala flashes a threat warning, which causes this massive flood of stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine in your bloodstream. But on the flip side, the evolutionary perspective, which is deeply grounded in Charles Darwin's theories, looks backward into our deep past. They ask why we have this intense physical reaction in the first place. Their answer? Our ancient brains are literally misinterpreting public speaking as a life-or-death situation. Standing totally isolated in front of a staring crowd is perceived by your ancient survival instincts as being cornered by a pack of hungry saber-toothed tigers. No wonder it sends your body into a full-blown fight-or-flight response.
All right, let's get into Section 5, Free Will and Positive Growth.
To give you a bit of history, in the early 1900s, Freud basically told us we were helpless slaves to our unconscious. Then, by mid-century, the behaviorists came along and told us we were slaves to our environmental conditioning. A bit bleak, right? But then, in the 1960s, this amazing third wave emerged, humanism. Led by iconic psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, this perspective boldly rejected those deterministic, sort of gloomy views. They fiercely argued that our behavior is not just blindly determined by our past traumas, nor by simplistic, animal-like rewards and punishments.
Humanists take an incredibly, almost radically positive approach to all of this. They truly believe in free will and the power of individual choice. They see human nature as inherently good and positive. Basically, to a humanist, the glass is always, always half full. We are all actively striving for positive growth and pushing to become the absolute best possible versions of ourselves, a peak state that Maslow famously termed self-actualization. So, given all that sunshine, how does a humanist view the totally terrifying act of public speaking? Well, uniquely, they don't see it as a trap or a punishment at all. Fear is actually viewed as a powerful motivator. In this lens, fear isn't a weakness, it's just a hurdle on your path to greatness. A humanist would argue that people purposely choose to step up to the podium, actively seeking out this really difficult task specifically so they can triumph over adversity, conquer their deepest fears, and achieve some truly profound personal growth. It's an opportunity, not a threat.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 6, the biopsychosocial model.
Okay, we've just explored 7 vastly different, competing theories explaining one single human behavior. So, I want to pose this ultimate question to you. Which perspective is right? Is it our biology firing off hormones, our culture putting the pressure on, our repressed childhoods, or just our active, spiraling thoughts?
Well, the real answer is that there actually is no single right perspective. Modern psychology embraces what we call the biopsychosocial model. This is an eclectic, highly integrated view that sees all 7 of these perspectives as interacting and totally interrelated. Basically, everything is connected.
Your genes, your thoughts, and your society all blend together in this incredibly complex recipe to create your behavior. So the next time you feel that sudden spike of panic right before stepping up to a microphone, ask yourself, which of these invisible forces is driving you right now? And more importantly, now that you finally know what they are, which one are you going to take control of first? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the fascinating world